Hello and welcome to another Spark AR tutorial video. In this video we'll be looking back at the randomizer and we'll be looking at how to create some difficulty. So using the inbuilt native UI picker, we can actually select the difficulty of the kind of questions that the user would be presented with. So what you see on screen here is a filter that I've basically just very quickly whipped up. It's not finished, it's kind of a work in progress, but the idea is the user would have to guess what the country or origin of the flag is. So we have easy, medium and hard, and then once the user is hitting the screen record button, it will then cycle through the various options for that difficulty, and then after a period of time will land on a flag. They have to then give their answer, and once they finish that and start a new recording, it reset and basically start everything from scratch. So this is a kind of build-up of some other videos we've done in this series. So again, I refer to the playlist for this series will be down in the description below. And we will be basically going through this from scratch. So I'm going to go and just start a new project and explain how this was created. So I'm just going to very quickly add a face tracker. And I'm going to right click and just add a null object. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using null objects as controllers for our effect. So we can toggle on whether things are shown or whether sound plays or anything, basically using these null controllers or null objects as a kind of overall arching grouping folder essentially. So I'm just going to rename this null object to be easy, so this will be our easy difficulty. I'm going to right click and add a plane. Just going to pause the video for a second, and I'm just going to scale this plane to be wider than it is high. I'm not going to worry too much about dimensions exactly at the moment, and just move this above the head a little bit like so. I'm also going to rename this plane to be easy as well. So as we go through this, you'll notice that I'll be basically calling everything that will be associated with the easy difficulty easy, and it's going to be associated with our medium or intermediate difficulty, intermediate or medium, and it's going to be for the hardest difficulty like so. Okay, so now we have our easy null object created. I'm just going to right click on it and hit duplicate or Command D or Control D depending on if you're a Windows or Mac user. On the duplicate null, I'm going to call this one medium, same with the plane. And again, you don't need to do this necessarily, it's just if somebody else wants to pick up your project or you need to come back to it at a later date, it's a good idea to just have an easy naming convention, just for kind of sanity's sake really. Okay, so now I've done that, I'm going to go to Project, Edit Properties. I'm going to disable Facebook platform because the native UI elements don't work on Facebook. I'm going to go to Capabilities, I'm just going to add the little plus button, and I'm going to add the native UI control. Now, I wouldn't necessarily need to do this if we were to add the controller ourselves, it would automatically do this for us. I'm showing you this though, again, just in case it doesn't work as you'd expect for whatever reason, because sometimes Spark can be a little bit buggy. Okay, so we have our picker now created. I'm going to go to View, and I'm just going to show my patch editor like so. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in my picker UI, and what this picker UI patch basically will do is it will show the little control at the bottom of the screen, little buttons essentially, and these are the only ones that are allowed by Instagram and Facebook. You can't use custom controls, you have to use their inbuilt recommended methods. And nothing will be visible at the moment until we start inputting textures. And as I've always said in other videos, whenever we start a new filter or project, the default value will always be 0. So just bear that in mind as we go forwards. Okay, so I'm just going to go and import some assets from my computer. So I've already created a folder for my flag quiz with subfolders in and these little images here. So these will be my buttons essentially. Now any button you have or any icon you have for your sliders or native UI pickers, etc., you don't really want it to be text. You really want it to be iconography. Sorry, I got a bit tongue-tied there. Just because, again, language difficulties or language differences, and also it'd be very hard to read text when it's really small on a small device, for example. Okay, so I'm just going to import my other two images. Back to my Flash quiz, back to medium, and just import the final one. There we go. So I'm going to select these 3 button images. You can have as many as you kind of want, well, within reason, basically. So I've got these 3 selected. I'm going to go to manual compression, and I need to make sure that compression is turned off on these native UI elements. So these images are made really small because, again, you've got to keep your file sizes quite low, but also when we turn off compression it would increase the file sizes, so we do need to try and bear that in mind, hence why I made them quite small images. I'm going to turn off compression, and now what I can do is if I go to my native UI picker and I go to texture 1, which is value 0, and select easy, go to texture 2, select medium, and texture 3, select hard, and hit play. Nothing will appear. If I restart or refresh, you should now see our 3 little buttons down here. If they're not visible, it might be because the native UI visible is actually toggled off, so toggle it on and it should become visible. And if it doesn't, just double check by hitting restart, like so. So whatever we pick here, you'll notice that the black ring around it will indicate our selection. So where we've got our selected option index, I'm just going to drag and add a value patch. So again, you wouldn't necessarily need to do this for your final effects, but this is just easy so we can see what it's doing and troubleshooting as we go along, because if you was to come back to this project or hand this whole project off to somebody else, they wouldn't necessarily be able to understand it. So again, I'm just trying to illustrate this as clear as possible. So default value is easy, so that's value 0, medium being 1, and texture 3 or hard being value 2. There we go. So the next thing we need to do is start inputting and creating our tape materials. So I'm just going to do that as quick as I can. So I'm just going to create a material, call this easy, change its shader type to be flat. I'm just going to duplicate that, rename my duplicate medium, and then one more time. So again, there's a little bit of prep work as there is with anything. Go to add asset, add animation sequence, and I'm just going to call this one easy. Go to texture, choose file, and I'm going to navigate to some of my images I've created earlier. So again, this is where you have to make your own or source your own, and all I did was look online for some flags of countries that a bit more recognizable, at least in Europe anyway. So I've renamed these flags A, B and C, or 1, 2, 3. Again, try and keep things sequential just so we can control the order things are shown in. I haven't resized these images, so again, I'd ideally want to keep these uniformly sized and kind of as minimal as possible, but I've just ripped these off the internet. Just going to hit open. There we go. Go over to my easy material and apply that easy sequence to it. And I'm just going to duplicate my animation sequence, rename this duplicate to be medium, new image texture, go to my medium folder. And again, it's a little bit of repetition, like teaching grains to suck eggs, but it's the kind of best way of learning it is to just do, essentially. And then one more time. New image sequence. And again, I've named all these A, B and C, but because they're in different sequences, there's no conflict there. There we go. And just assign each of these animation sequences to their respective texture. And now I've done that, I'm going to go to my planes, so easy plane, material, and add the easy material. Same with medium, and finally hard. And you should now start seeing things sort of appearing on screen and flashing chaotically. I'm just going to pause things so we don't get kind of too much flickering on screen. So now we have all of our assets in and we've got everything sort of set up. It's now time to actually get to the meat of this, which is the patch editor. So we've already got a native UI inputted, but at the moment it's doing nothing. So I'm going to just drag my camera into my patch editor. So I'm going to be using the video recording action as our starting action, but also our reset. And the reason I'm doing that is because when we're recording or taking pictures, we can't really screen tap again, and you'll find that certain actions conflict with each other. So I tend to prefer using photo capture or screen recording or video recording, sorry, as the main controller. At least in my personal preference. So I'm going to drag from my video recording output. I'm going to add a pulse. I'm just going to move this over here for now. I'm just going to drag from my video recording again and add a delay, which we don't actually need, but I'm putting it in there again if I want to come back to this at a later date, which I probably will do. And then I'm going to drag from my delay and add another pulse, and then add a switch to my scene, to my patch editor, and then hook up my pulse turned on to my turned on input on my switch, and the same with the turned off. And then I'm going to also add a runtime patch. So from this runtime patch, I'm just going to drag, add an offset. So if you've seen the random images filters I've done before, this is basically how we're going to control and reset everything essentially. So I'm going to drag from this pulse, the turned on, to the reset on our offset. So what this means is when our screen recording is re-triggered, it will reset our timer or our countdown and everything will start fresh. And then I'm going to drag from my offset and add a less than, or you could use a greater than, or whatever you choose. I'm just going to use a less than. And I'm going to say, if the timer is less than 3 seconds, the randomizer will keep randomizing through its options, and then after 3 seconds it will stop on whatever result it's landed on. I'm going to now add an and we're going to say, if this is true, i.e. the recording action is being fired and the value is less than 3, then we want it to send a signal to say perform the next step. So now we've got the kind of general gist set up, we now need to start actually hooking up our null objects and our sequences. So I'm going to drag from my value. Again, we don't need that, we could just drag directly from the index, but I'm going to use the value for illustrative purposes like so. And I'm going to add an equals exactly. So when this picker here, value equals 0, we can say play a sound or start an animation sequence. But in this case, we just want it to control our null objects or everything contained there within. So when this equals exactly 0, we want our null object to be visible. But we also want the animation to start being fired, and only the animation that's associated with that null object. So I'm going to drag from my equals exactly, add an and. So when this equals 0 and these two conditions here have been met, which is recording and time equaling less than 3 seconds, then and only then will the animation start playing. So we're going to go with loop animation. I'm going to set the duration to be 0.05 because I want this to rotate or cycle through fairly fast. Drag from the loop to a random. My end value will be 3 because I've got 3 frames. Again, depending on how many frames you have in your animation sequence is depending on what value you input at this point. And I'm just going to add a round. You don't need to do this, but I tend to do this again just so I can see what's kind of going on. And then I'm going to go over to my easy animation sequence where it says current frame and hook that up to my random output. So to explain what's happening here, when the user presses the screen record button, it's going to fire off a signal here and start the timer here to start our animation playing. The animation will only start being randomized and playing if the value equals what is outputted by the difficulty option down below. So we've got our easy one set up now, but what if we want to start to do the others? So to make my life easy, I'm just going to drag the box over these here, so the equals, the and, the loop, the random and the round, press Command C or Control C and paste. And then I'm now going to say when this equals exactly 1, and everything else we can keep the same because I've got the same amount of images in the next difficulty. I want the medium sequence to be hooked up to this new round, and I want the medium null object visibility to be controlled by this equals exactly 1 here. And again, I'm going to do this one more time, so you do this as many times as the number of options or difficulties you're going to have in your scene. There we go. And by doing it this way, I don't have to relink everything back up. It's copying all links, so everything is still being linked up to this and here. Making sure that this is now equals 3, and our hard sequence here is set to play, like so. So let's just hit play. So now if I toggle the different difficulties, you'll notice that the options will change. So there's something not quite right here with our third, so what's going on there? That needs to be a 2, there we go. So 0, 1 and 2, and that will change the different planes that have been shown, and therefore the animation sequences that will be associated with those planes or materials. And that's a very basic difficulty controller. And again, we could hook up things like play sound, etc., from these outputs. So what if we don't want the user to be able to see the picker or change whilst recording? Well, the simplest thing to do will be to drag from the control output, in this case the video recording, into a knot, and hook this knot up to my picker visible. So whilst the user is recording, the native UI picker is no longer visible on screen, so therefore they can't change their difficulty whilst going on, and therefore that alleviates potential errors that could occur if the user could swap whilst recording, where they'd start to see two different planes flipping out basically, or switching. If another thing to bear in mind is because everything starts off at 0, we can actually control our start index here. So if we didn't want the default difficulty to be, for example, the easy difficulty, I could say set this starting value to be 1 and then refresh. So when the filter is first launched, it actually starts off at the medium difficulty because it'll start the index at 1. So that's just another thing to bear in mind if you don't want to. So if you want to lay your thing out so you actually have everything start off as pretty medium and then they can choose easier or harder, that's just a way around that. And that's essentially the main setup for this, using the combination of the randomizer with the native UI picker. And like I said, you can hook this up to sounds from the equals exactly. We can have as many sequences as we want, we can have as many images as we want. We just need to adjust our times within our loop animation and our values here. And by using the ands, this kind of double checks everything to make sure the conditions are met before the next action is performed. So a full link to everything covered in this tutorial will be down in the description below, so you'll be able to find the Gumroad pack when it's available. you will be able to see a screenshot of this patch setup in the description as well. Also, if you've got any queries or questions, there will also be a link to my website and email address if you need further assistance. Bearing in mind this is very much a work in progress, so we may come back to this and tweak it in the future. But hopefully this kind of gives you a kind of stepping stone idea of what we could do and how to take your effects that a little bit further, just using the sort of patch editor setups. So I've been Stephen Fisher. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.